"Sleep well, sweetie," said my daughter-in-law, locking my door from outside. Through the window, I watched them pour gasoline around the house. My son lit the match, smiling. Their plan: steal my $3 billion. But when they returned from their alibi dinner, I was sitting in the living room with the fire marshal. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how a woman who built a tech empire from nothing discovered that her own family considered her more valuable dead than alive. Oh, and how spectacularly wrong they were about that. 6 hours earlier, I was lying in my hospital bed, pretending to be heavily sedated, while my son Michael and his wife Lauren whispered their murder plans 3 feet away. Funny thing about being 72 and worth $3 billion, everyone assumes your hearing is shot. Mine isn't. Neither is my memory, despite what they'd been telling the doctors. "The pills aren't working fast enough," Lauren hissed. "She could live another 10 years at this rate." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "We can't just speed things up. There's security footage, nurses checking on her every hour. Then we do it at home. Tonight. Make it look like an accident." I kept my breathing steady, though my heart was racing. These two vultures had been feeding me increasing doses of digoxin for months, disguising it as heart medication. They thought I was confused, forgetful. What I actually was? Furious. See, I'd built Pinnacle Technologies from my garage in 1987. By 2010, we were worth $50 billion. I sold to Microsoft for $3 billion, keeping enough shares to live comfortably forever. Michael had always been lazy, expecting inheritance to solve his problems. Lauren was worse, a former pharmaceutical sales rep who knew exactly which medications could mimic dementia in elderly patients. "Fire would be perfect," she continued. "Old house, faulty wiring. She's been forgetting to turn off appliances lately. Actually, Lauren, I'd been documenting every single one of your attempted poisonings. But thanks for the character assessment. The drive home was surreal. Michael helped me to my bedroom with such tender concern. You'd never guess he was planning my murder. Lauren brought me tea, more digitalis, no doubt, and kissed my forehead like a devoted daughter. "We're going to dinner, Grandma Kate," she announced. "Giuseppe's. We made reservations for 7:30. Giuseppe's was 45 minutes away. They were establishing an alibi. The moment their car disappeared, I got to work. First, I called my private security company. "This is Catherine Matthews. I need fire department and police at my residence immediately. Code 7. Code 7 meant family threat, imminent danger. Then I gathered evidence. The fake medication bottles Lauren had been using. The financial documents showing Michael's gambling debts, $2 million I hadn't known about. The insurance policy they'd taken out on me 6 months ago, with them as beneficiaries. By the time I heard footsteps on the front porch 40 minutes later, I was ready. The smell hit them first. Gasoline poured liberally around the foundation while I watched from upstairs. Then they saw the smoke detectors Michael had disabled blinking red again. I'd reconnected them all. Lauren pushed open the front door, expecting to find my charred remains. Instead, she found me sitting calmly in my favorite armchair, very much alive, with Fire Marshal Robert Chen and Detective Sandra Mills flanked beside me. "Grandma Kate!" Michael exclaimed, his face a mask of relief and terror. "Thank God you're safe. We smelled smoke from the street." "How thoughtful of you to notice," I replied, "especially since you're the ones who started it." The silence that followed was delicious. You know what's better than seeing a plan backfire spectacularly? Watching the planners realize they've walked into their own trap. Lauren recovered first, because sociopaths always do. "Kate, sweetie, you're confused. We just got back from dinner. Look, we have the receipt." She fumbled in her purse with shaking hands. Fire Marshal Chen stepped forward. "Ma'am, we found accelerant poured around the entire perimeter of this house. The pattern indicates someone intended to trap whoever was inside." His voice was professional, but his eyes were hard as granite. Michael's face had gone gray. "That's impossible. Who would do such a thing?" Detective Mills consulted her notepad. According to Mrs. Matthews, she observed 2 individuals from her bedroom window at approximately 8:15 p.m. They appeared to be pouring liquid from red containers around the foundation. "But we were at Giuseppe's," Lauren insisted. "The staff will remember us." "I'm sure they will," I said pleasantly, "since you made such a point of being seen there. Tell me, How did you manage to order dinner, drive 45 minutes home, attempt to commit arson, and still have time to notice smoke from the street? You're either remarkably efficient criminals or terrible at math. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom, you're not making sense. Why would we hurt you? $2 million in gambling debts might provide some motivation, Detective Mills noted, pulling out Michael's financial records, along with a recent $2 million life insurance policy on your mother. The color drained from Lauren's face. How did you get those records? I finished for her. Darling, when you're worth $3 billion, you don't just assume your family loves you for your sparkling personality. I've had investigators monitoring both of you for months. Lauren's mask finally slipped completely. You paranoid old witch? You've been spying on your own family? Lucky for me, I replied, since my own family has been trying to murder me. Fire Marshal Chen held up an evidence bag containing an empty gasoline container. We found this in the bushes by your front gate. Fresh fingerprints on the handle. Michael stared at the container like it might bite him. Lauren, however, was calculating. I could practically see her scrambling for a new strategy. This is all a misunderstanding, she said suddenly. Kate's been having episodes, paranoid delusions. We've been trying to get her medical care, but she refuses treatment. Medical care like the digitalis you've been slipping into my tea? I asked conversationally. The room went dead silent. Lauren's eyes widened in shock before narrowing with rage. Detective Mills leaned forward. Ma'am, are you saying you've been poisoned? Systematically, for approximately 4 months, I confirmed. I have hair samples, blood work, and video surveillance showing Lauren adding medication to my food and beverages. Michael found his voice. Mom, that's insane. Lauren's been taking care of you. The medication is for your heart condition. What heart condition would that be, Michael? I've never had heart problems in my life. But digitalis poisoning mimics dementia symptoms beautifully, doesn't it, Lauren? Lauren's silence was answer enough. Detective Mills stood up. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, I'm going to need you both to come with me for questioning. This is ridiculous, Michael protested. She's a senile old woman making up stories. That's when I smiled my sweetest grandmother smile. Oh, honey, there's nothing senile about $3 billion and a very detailed will that, as of this morning, no longer includes either of you. The next morning brought reporters to my front door like vultures to roadkill. Billionaire tech pioneer survives murder plot. Family greed turns deadly. Silicon Valley grandmother outsmarts killers. I made coffee and watched the circus from my kitchen window. 30 years of carefully guarded privacy, gone overnight. But frankly, I'd rather be a living headline than a dead footnote. My attorney, James Harrison, arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, looking like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. Kate, this is a legal nightmare. The media attention alone could complicate everything. Good, I said, pouring him coffee in my favorite mug, the one that says, World's Most Dangerous Grandmother. I want Michael and Lauren to know exactly what they've lost. The police are charging them with attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. Lauren's also facing charges for drug trafficking. Apparently, the digitalis she used requires a prescription. She stole it from her old pharmaceutical contacts, I explained. I had my investigators trace the serial numbers. Very sloppy for someone who thought she was so clever. James shook his head. Kate, they're your son and daughter-in-law. Are you certain you want to pursue this to the full extent? I set down my coffee cup harder than necessary. James, they tried to burn me alive. They've been slowly poisoning me for months. Exactly how much family loyalty should I show to people who see me as a walking dollar sign? I understand your anger, but consider the implications. Michael is your only child. If he goes to prison, then maybe he should have considered that before trying to murder his mother for money. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Mills. Lab confirms digitalis in all food samples. Video evidence admissible. Case is solid. James, I said, showing him the message. I didn't survive the tech industry by being sentimental. I survived by being smarter than the people trying to destroy me. There was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding what looked like a casserole dish. Behind her stood 3 other neighbors, all with concerned expressions and covered dishes. Kate, dear, Mrs. Rodriguez said when I opened the door. We heard about the terrible incident. We brought food. Within minutes, My kitchen was full of neighbors I'd barely spoken to in 15 years. They'd all seen the news, of course, but more importantly, they'd all had their suspicions about Michael and Lauren. "That boy never visited unless he needed something," observed Mr. Patterson from 2 houses down. "And that wife of his?" He shook his head disapprovingly. "Always asking questions about your business," added Mrs. Chen. "Last month she wanted to know if you'd mentioned updating your will." It was fascinating, really. My neighbors had been watching my potential murder unfold in real time, recognizing the warning signs I'd been too close to see clearly. "Mrs. Matthews," said young Sarah from next door, "I recorded some of their arguments. They were loud enough to hear through the walls. Should I give the recordings to the police?" 20 minutes later, Detective Mills arrived to collect what amounted to a neighborhood's worth of evidence against Michael and Lauren. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd been documenting their behavior. As the neighbors finally left with promises to check on me daily, I found myself feeling something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for surviving, I'd never doubted I would, but for discovering I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. My phone rang. James, calling from his office. "Kate, I have news. Michael and Lauren's bail hearing is tomorrow. The prosecutor is asking for $2 million each." "Perfect," I said. "They don't have $2 million. That's why they tried to kill me in the first place." "Kate," his voice held a warning note. "James, I want you to attend that hearing. I want you to look my son in the eye and tell him that his mother, the woman he tried to murder, hopes he enjoys his time in jail to think about what family really means." The bail hearing was a masterclass in cosmic justice. I sat in the front row, wearing my best navy suit and the pearl necklace Michael's father had given me for our anniversary. If my son was going to see his mother for possibly the last time, I wanted him to remember exactly what he'd thrown away. Michael looked terrible. Orange jumpsuit, hollow eyes, hands shaking slightly from what the jail doctor had diagnosed as withdrawal. Apparently his gambling addiction had expanded to include cocaine. Lauren sat beside him, her usual polished appearance replaced by the harsh reality of county detention center beauty standards. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Valdez, laid out the case with surgical precision. "Your Honor, these defendants systematically poisoned an elderly woman for 4 months, then attempted to burn her alive to cover their tracks and collect insurance money. Michael's public defender, a tired-looking man who clearly drew the short straw, attempted a weak defense about family misunderstandings and stress-related poor judgment. Lauren's attorney, expensive, private, tried to paint her as a devoted daughter-in-law, driven to desperation by my alleged mental deterioration. That's when Judge Patricia Williams asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mrs. Matthews, you're present in court today. Would you like to make a statement regarding bail for the defendants?" I stood slowly, using the cane I didn't actually need for maximum dramatic effect. "Your Honor, I spent 40 years building a technology company from nothing. I employed 3,000 people, paid millions in taxes, and donated over $50 million to various charities. I did this as a single mother after my husband died when Michael was 12. The courtroom was silent, except for the whisper of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. I loved my son unconditionally. I paid for his education, his wedding, his house, his car. When he developed a gambling problem, I paid those debts too, hoping he'd learn from his mistakes." I turned to look directly at Michael, who couldn't meet my eyes. When he married Lauren, I welcomed her like the daughter I'd never had. I trusted her with my health. "My home, my life," my voice hardened. "They repaid that love by trying to murder me for money they were too lazy to earn. Your Honor, these people saw a 72-year-old woman and thought she'd be easy prey. They were wrong." I sat down to absolute silence. Judge Williams reviewed her notes for what felt like 10 minutes. "Bail is set at $5 million each," she announced finally. "These defendants attempted to murder a vulnerable elderly person for financial gain. They pose a clear danger to the victim and the community. $5 million. Even if they'd managed to steal my money, they couldn't have afforded that." As court security led them away, Lauren turned and mouthed something at me that looked distinctly like a threat. Michael, on the other hand, was crying. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like angry bees. "Mrs. Matthews, how do you feel seeing your son arrested?" "Relieved," I answered honestly. For months, I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was just being murdered. There's actually something comforting about knowing the difference. Will you visit them in jail? I paused, considering the question seriously. I spent 72 years being the kind of woman who forgave everything and forgot nothing. It nearly got me killed. I think it's time to try being the kind of woman who remembers everything and forgives nothing. That quote made every evening newscast in the country. But the real satisfaction came 3 hours later when James called with an update. Kate, I have interesting news. Apparently, Michael's cellmate is a gentleman named Rodriguez who was convicted of killing his mother for insurance money. How poetic, I murmured. Rodriguez has already explained to Michael exactly what happens to people who murder their mothers. In very colorful terms, I'm told. I smiled for the first time in months. James, I think I'm going to sleep very well tonight. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the empty shell of what had been Michael's house, watching the moving company load my belongings into trucks. The bank had foreclosed when his gambling debts came to light. Apparently, my son had been more creative with other people's money than I'd realized. Mrs. Matthews? The moving foreman approached hesitantly. We found this in a bedroom safe. He handed me a manila envelope marked insurance policies. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Not just the policy on my life, but additional policies on my property, my car, even my jewelry. Lauren had been quite thorough in her planning. But there was something else. A handwritten letter in Michael's scrawl. Lauren, I can't do this anymore. She's my mother. Find another way. M. Dated 2 days before their arrest. So my son had grown a conscience at the last minute. How touching. Too bad it was approximately 4 months too late. My phone rang. Detective Mills. Mrs. Matthews, we've had a development. Lauren's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cooperate how? She's claiming Michael was the mastermind. Says she was coerced, afraid for her own safety if she didn't go along with his plan. I laughed, surprising myself with how bitter it sounded. Of course she is. Lauren's always been smarter than Michael. She's probably figured out which one of them is more likely to get the death penalty. There's more. She's also claiming you've been mentally abusive for years, that Michael felt trapped by your financial control. Financial control? I could feel my blood pressure rising. I paid for everything in their lives without asking for anything in return. Exactly what control was I exerting? According to her statement, you held money over their heads, threatened to cut them off whenever they disagreed with you, made them feel worthless. The audacity was breathtaking. Detective Mills, I have 30 years of bank records showing every gift, every payment, every bailout I provided to my son. Find me one instance where I demanded anything in return. That's actually why I'm calling. The prosecutor wants to meet with you. Lauren's defense strategy is shifting to paint you as a manipulative matriarch who drove your family to desperation. When? Tomorrow at 9 a.m. After hanging up, I stood in Michael's former house, surrounded by the detritus of his failed life, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: uncertainty. Not about my innocence, that was absolute, but about whether a jury would see things the same way. How easy would it be to paint a wealthy, childless widow as controlling? How simple to convince people that $3 billion came with strings attached. I walked through the master bedroom where Lauren had carefully planned my death. In the attached bathroom, I found prescription bottles she'd apparently missed when fleeing. All heart medications, all with my name on them, all containing digitalis, according to the labels. But here's what Lauren didn't know about being a successful businesswoman. You always keep detailed records. Every transaction, every conversation, every decision. I pulled out my phone and called James. I need you to access my private files. Security code 7749. There's a folder marked Family Financial History. Bring everything to the prosecutor's office tomorrow. Kate, what are we talking about here? 30 years of documentation showing every penny I ever gave Michael, every conversation about money, every time I bailed him out of trouble. If Lauren wants to play the victim, let's show the jury exactly what kind of victim tries to burn her benefactor alive. How extensive are these records? I smiled, thinking of my decades in the tech industry where documentation could make or break a company. James, I didn't become a billionaire by trusting people's memories. I have everything. That night, I sat in my new temporary apartment, a penthouse suite downtown with security that would make the White House jealous, and reviewed 30 years of being the mother I thought I should be. Bank statements showing Michael's college tuition, $180,000. His wedding, $75,000. 3 cars, $95,000. Credit card debt paid 5 separate times, $340,000. Gambling debts, $2,100,000. Total given to my son in his adult life, $2,190,000. Total requests for repayment, 0. Total expressions of gratitude. I'd need Lauren's cooperation to count that low. The prosecutor's office felt like a battleground, and I was ready for war. Patricia Valdez had spread my documentation across every available surface. Bank statements, receipts, recorded phone calls, even photographs from family gatherings with timestamps showing Michael's various expensive gifts. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, reviewing a particularly damning bank transfer, "this is remarkable. You've documented every financial interaction with your son for 30 years. In my business, you learn that people's memories become very selective when money is involved. I preferred facts to feelings." She held up a recording device. "And these phone conversations? I recorded all our discussions about money after his first gambling incident in 2019. Michael had a tendency to forget the terms of our agreements. We listened to several recordings. In one, from just 6 months ago, Michael was practically weeping as he begged for help with a $400,000 debt to some very unfriendly people in Atlantic City. "Mom, I'm dead if you don't help me. They're serious people. Michael, this is the 4th time you've said never again. What am I supposed to believe? I know, but I've learned my lesson. This is it, I swear. After this, I'm done. No more gambling, no more debts, no more asking you to clean up my messes. You said that last time, and the time before that. Mom, please, I'm your son." And then my voice, tired and resigned. "Transfer the money, James. All of it." Patricia paused the recording. "You paid it? Every penny, as always. And here's Lauren's recorded statement from yesterday," she continued, playing a new recording. Michael was under constant pressure from his mother. She used money to control every aspect of our lives. We felt like prisoners in our own home. The irony was staggering. She's describing a prisoner who drove a BMW I bought him and lived in a house I paid for while wearing clothes I funded. "This next recording is particularly interesting," Patricia said. "It's from 3 weeks ago." Michael's voice filled the room again. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious. We think, maybe it's time you considered assisted living." "Assisted living? Michael, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. But you've been forgetful. The bank called because you missed a payment on the charity fund. You never miss payments." Of course I'd missed the payment. I was being slowly poisoned, and my thinking was getting foggy. But Michael's voice on the recording held something I hadn't caught at the time: satisfaction. "Mrs. Matthews," Patricia said gently, "they weren't just trying to steal your money. They were systematically destroying your reputation and cognitive abilities to make the theft look justified. The sophistication of their plan was actually impressive in a sociopathic way. Create dementia symptoms through poisoning. Document my resulting confusion. Build a case for incompetence, then remove the inconvenient witness. There's something else," Patricia continued. "We found Lauren's computer. She'd been researching inheritance law, specifically how to accelerate the probate process for deceased persons with substantial assets. She showed me printouts of Lauren's search history. How long does probate take for murdered persons? Inheritance rights when primary heir is in prison. Life insurance payouts in cases of natural disaster deaths. She was planning for multiple scenarios, I realized. If the fire didn't work, she had backup plans, including one where Michael took the fall and she inherited everything as his surviving spouse. That hit me like a physical blow. Lauren hadn't just been trying to kill me. She'd been positioning herself to betray Michael, too. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide behind lawyers forever, old woman." Patricia saw me reading it. "Mrs. Matthews, that's witness intimidation. We can trace that number." "Don't bother," I said, already calling my security company. "Lauren's out on bond through some connection her lawyer found. I expected this." "What do you mean?" I smiled grimly. "Patricia, I didn't survive 40 years in the tech industry by underestimating people who wanted to destroy me. Lauren thinks she's playing chess while I've been playing three-dimensional chess. She's about to learn the difference. Mrs. Matthews, what aren't you telling me? That I've been recording everything since the day they moved into my house, including several conversations where they discussed backup plans if their first murder attempt failed. Patricia's eyes widened. You have recordings of them planning contingencies? 3 months' worth. Lauren's thorough. I'll give her that. She covered every angle except the possibility that her intended victim was smarter than her would-be killers. Lauren made her first mistake 12 hours later. My security company called at 3 a.m. to report someone attempting to break into my old house, the one she'd tried to burn down with me in it. She's been watching the place, Detective Mills explained over the phone. Apparently she hid something there and came back to retrieve it. What kind of something? A second insurance policy. This one for $10 million, taken out last week under your forged signature. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after arrest, trial, and potential life imprisonment, Lauren was still trying to profit from my death. I arrived at the house to find Lauren in handcuffs, screaming at the officers about police harassment and wrongful arrest. She saw me, and her expression shifted to pure hatred. This isn't over, she snarled. You think you're so smart, but I know things about you that would destroy your precious reputation. Really? I asked conversationally. Do tell. Your precious husband's death wasn't as natural as everyone thinks. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several officers turned to stare at me. Lauren, I said carefully, David died of pancreatic cancer. There were 4 doctors present, a hospital full of witnesses, and a thoroughly documented medical history. Documented by you. How convenient that he died right after signing his will, leaving everything to you instead of Michael. Detective Mills stepped forward. Ma'am, are you making an accusation? Lauren's lawyer, who had apparently been roused from bed to deal with his client's latest stupidity, grabbed her arm. Don't say another word. But Lauren was beyond reason now. She poisoned him just like I poisoned her. The only difference is she got away with it. The lawyer's face went white. Several officers exchanged glances, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. Genuine fear. Not because the accusation was true. David had died surrounded by medical professionals after a 6-month battle with cancer, but because Lauren had just demonstrated how easily someone could plant doubt about the past when the only witnesses were dead. Detective Mills, I said calmly, I assume you'll want to examine my late husband's medical records. Mrs. Matthews, that won't be necessary. We have extensive documentation about your husband's illness and death. This appears to be a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. But I could see the seed of uncertainty in some of the officers' faces. Lauren had found my weakness. The one person I couldn't protect from her lies was dead. However, Detective Mills continued, Mrs. Patterson, your accusation against Mrs. Matthews has been recorded. If you'd like to make a formal statement, we can arrange that. Lauren's lawyer physically put his hand over her mouth. My client declines to make any further statements. As they led her away, Lauren managed to pull free long enough to shout, Check her medicine cabinet. Check what she keeps in her bedroom. She's not the innocent victim she pretends to be. Back in my car, I sat in the darkness and tried to process what had just happened. Lauren had crossed a line from attempted murder to character assassination of a dead man. But she'd also revealed something crucial. She'd been in my house long enough to go through my personal belongings. I called James immediately. I need you to meet me at my house, now. Kate, it's 4 a.m. James. Lauren just accused me of murdering David. She also specifically mentioned my medicine cabinet and bedroom. She's been searching my house for something to use against me. 40 minutes later, James and I stood in my bedroom with 2 police officers examining what Lauren might have been looking for. My medicine cabinet contained exactly what you'd expect from a 72-year-old woman. Blood pressure medication, vitamins, and an old prescription for sleeping pills from after David's death. But in my bedroom safe, we found something that made my blood freeze. An envelope marked, "For Catherine," in case anything happens to me. David. Inside was a handwritten letter from my husband, dated 1 week before his death. Kate, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably grieving. But there are things you need to know about Michael and Lauren. They've been asking questions about my will. about your finances, about what would happen if something happened to both of us. Lauren specifically asked about medication interactions and whether certain drugs could accelerate illness. I didn't tell you because I hoped I was wrong. But if I'm not, please be careful. Our son may not be the man we thought we raised. D. I sat on my bed, staring at my husband's final warning, and realized that Lauren and Michael's plan had been in motion for over 2 years. They'd been plotting this since before David died. Mrs. Matthews, one of the officers said gently, "This letter suggests your husband suspected your son and daughter-in-law might pose a threat to you." "Yes," I whispered. "He tried to warn me from the grave." The trial began on a Monday morning in October, with a media circus that would have made P.T. Barnum proud. Tech billionaire versus killer family. Mother's love turns deadly. The ultimate inheritance battle. I sat in the front row wearing my best black suit, the one I'd worn to board meetings when I needed to project absolute authority. If a jury was going to decide my son's fate, I wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with. Michael had lost weight in jail. He looked smaller somehow, diminished in his orange jumpsuit. Lauren, seated at a separate defense table, had gone the opposite route, playing up her youth and vulnerability in a conservative blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The prosecutor's opening statement was a masterpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed so profound that it transformed a son into a would-be killer and a daughter-in-law into a calculating poisoner. The defendants didn't just want Catherine Matthews' money, they wanted her life." Michael's attorney tried the broken family approach. "Michael Matthews is a troubled man who lost his way. But wanting your mother's approval and inheritance isn't the same as wanting her dead." Lauren's lawyer went for the jugular. "My client was manipulated by an older, more sophisticated criminal, Catherine Matthews herself. The evidence will show that Mrs. Matthews has a history of using money to control people. And when that control was threatened, she orchestrated this entire scenario to eliminate threats to her fortune." That was interesting. Lauren was positioning herself as my victim rather than Michael's accomplice. The first week of testimony established the basic facts: poisoning, financial manipulation, the fire. But during cross-examination, Lauren's lawyer began his real strategy. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, approaching the witness stand with a predatory smile, "you recorded conversations with your son without his knowledge, correct? I documented our financial discussions for legal protection. You spied on your own family. I protected myself from people who were stealing from me." Stealing? Or taking what they believed they were entitled to inherit? The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. The lawyer was painting my documentation as paranoia rather than prudence. "Mrs. Matthews, in 30 years, how many times did your son ask you to stop giving him money?" I paused, understanding the trap. "He never asked me to stop. He never said, 'Mom, I don't want your help anymore.' No, he never said, 'I want to be independent.' No. So he accepted your money willingly?" "Yes. And in exchange, you expected what?" "Nothing." "Nothing? You expected no gratitude, no visits, no inclusion in family decisions, no say in how the money was spent?" Each question hit like a scalpel. He was making my generosity sound like manipulation, my love sound like control. "Mrs. Matthews, when your son developed a gambling problem, did you seek professional help for him?" "I suggested it. But you continued giving him money to pay his debts?" "Yes. Didn't that enable his addiction?" "I was trying to protect him, or control him." That night, I sat in my hotel room and replayed the cross-examination. Lauren's lawyer had done something brilliant and terrifying. He'd taken my love for my son and twisted it into something sinister. James knocked on my door at 10 p.m. "Kate, we need to talk about tomorrow's testimony. They're going to make me sound like a monster." "Aren't they?" "They're going to try. But we have something they don't expect." He handed me a manila folder. "Remember when you had your investigators following Michael and Lauren? They recorded more than just financial meetings. Inside were transcripts of conversations I'd never heard. Michael and Lauren in their car. After visiting me in the hospital, Lauren, 'She's weaker than I thought. A few more doses and she won't be able to sign her name.' Michael, 'What if someone notices the symptoms?' Lauren, 'Who's going to notice? You're her only family, and you're helping me dose her. Perfect plan.' Michael, 'I feel sick about this.' Lauren, 'You'll feel sicker if those Atlantic City people kill you for the money you owe. This is survival, not murder. Michael. It's exactly murder. Lauren. No, it's evolution. She's old, she's alone, and she's in our way. This is just nature taking its course with a little help. I stared at the transcripts. James, this conversation happened 3 weeks before the fire. And gets worse. Look at page 4. Lauren's voice. The fire has to look accidental. Make sure the gasoline burns off completely. If there's any residue, we're finished. Michael. What if she wakes up? What if she tries to get out? Lauren. She won't. I gave her double the usual dose tonight. She'll sleep right through it. I set down the transcript with shaking hands. They were planning to burn me alive while I was unconscious. Kate, this is first-degree murder with premeditation. The death penalty is still on the table. Outside my hotel window, the city sparkled with lights from families having dinner, watching television, living normal lives where sons didn't plot their mothers' deaths. James, I said quietly, play those recordings in court tomorrow. All of them. I want that jury to hear exactly what my loving family thought of me. The courtroom erupted when the recordings played. Michael actually vomited into a trash can when he heard his own voice planning my murder. Lauren sat stone-faced, but I could see her calculating, probably trying to determine if this evidence could be challenged or if her only option was complete denial. The prosecutor let the recordings speak for themselves, then called her final witness, Dr. Sarah Chen, the toxicologist who had analyzed my blood samples. Dr. Chen, what level of digitalis did you find in Mrs. Matthews' system? Enough to cause serious cardiac episodes in someone her age. Another few weeks of exposure, and she likely would have died of apparent heart failure. Was the poisoning detectable? Not without specific testing. Digitalis mimics age-related cognitive decline and heart problems. Most doctors would have attributed her symptoms to natural aging. In your professional opinion, was this poisoning sophisticated? Extremely. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge carefully calibrated the doses to create maximum confusion while avoiding immediate detection. Lauren's lawyer cross-examined aggressively, but Dr. Chen destroyed his attempts to suggest accidental contamination or medical error. Then Michael's attorney made a desperate gambit. Dr. Chen, is it possible that Mrs. Matthews poisoned herself to frame my client? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several jurors looked at me with new interest. Counselor, Dr. Chen replied with professional ice, are you suggesting a 72-year-old woman poisoned herself for 4 months, documented the evidence, then set up an elaborate arson scenario to frame her own son? That would require the kind of criminal sophistication typically associated with master manipulators or sociopaths. Is that your professional opinion? My professional opinion is that the poisoning pattern indicates external administration by someone familiar with pharmaceutical protocols. The victim showed classic signs of unwitting ingestion, but the seed was planted. I could see it in some of the jurors' faces, doubt about whether I was victim or mastermind. During the lunch recess, Lauren's attorney approached me in the hallway. Mrs. Matthews, my client is prepared to testify that this entire scenario was orchestrated by you. Really? And how exactly did I orchestrate my own attempted murder? You discovered Michael's gambling debts and decided to eliminate him as an heir. You poisoned yourself to create evidence, then arranged the fire to make him look guilty. The audacity was breathtaking. And my motivation for this elaborate self-destruction would be to protect your fortune from a son you'd come to see as worthless. That afternoon, Lauren took the stand in her own defense. She was polished, tearful, and utterly convincing as she painted herself as a victim of both Michael's desperation and my manipulation. I loved Catherine like a mother, she testified, dabbing her eyes. But she was controlling, demanding, impossible to please. She held money over our heads constantly. Can you give the jury an example? When Michael wanted to change jobs, she threatened to cut off our support. When we talked about starting a family, she said she wouldn't help with expenses unless we moved closer to her. Everything came with strings attached. And the poisoning? I never poisoned anyone. Catherine had been acting strangely for months, forgetting things, accusing people of stealing from her, paranoid about her food. I think she was having mental health issues and medicated herself. What about the fire? Here, Lauren's composure cracked slightly. I don't know what happened with the fire. Michael and I were at dinner. We came home to find the police there. It was terrifying. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. Ms. Patterson, you testified that you never poisoned Mrs. Matthews. Are you familiar with digitalis? No. You've never handled digitalis in your pharmaceutical career? I sold medications. I didn't manufacture them. But you would know how digitalis affects elderly patients. Yes, I would have basic knowledge. And you would know how to obtain it? Objection, Lauren's lawyer called. I'll allow it. Ms. Patterson, you testified that Mrs. Matthews was acting paranoid and forgetful. Did you encourage her to see a doctor? Yes, several times. But you didn't mention the possibility of poisoning to any medical professional. Why would I? I didn't know she was being poisoned. Yet you had the training to recognize digitalis poisoning symptoms? Lauren's silence stretched too long. It never occurred to me. Never occurred to you, despite your pharmaceutical background, that her symptoms might indicate drug toxicity? Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Lauren's medical knowledge had betrayed her. As the court recessed, I watched my son being led back to his cell. He looked broken, defeated, like a man finally understanding the full consequences of his choices. Lauren, however, caught my eye as she passed my row. Her expression held no remorse, no regret, just cold calculation and the promise that this wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and a verdict that would determine whether my son spent his life in prison or whether his wife's manipulation had successfully painted me as the real villain. Either way, I'd already won the only victory that mattered. I was alive to see justice served. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. I spent that time in my hotel room, staring out at the city where I'd built my fortune and nearly lost my life, trying to make peace with whatever verdict they reached. James brought updates every few hours. They've asked for the recordings to be replayed. They want to review the financial documents. They're asking about the insurance policies. At 3 p.m. on the second day, we got the call. Verdict reached. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curiosity seekers, and a surprising number of people who'd followed the trial obsessively. I took my seat in the front row, wearing the same black suit I'd worn throughout the proceedings, and waited to learn my son's fate. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Catherine Matthews, how do you find? Guilty. Michael's shoulders slumped. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Michael was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of arson in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. Lauren's verdicts came next. Guilty on all counts, plus additional charges for poisoning and fraud. The jury had seen through her manipulation completely. Judge Williams set sentencing for the following week, but the prosecutor's office had already indicated they would seek life without parole for both defendants. As court officers approached Michael to escort him back to custody, he turned to me one final time. Mom, he called out across the courtroom. I'm sorry. For the first time in months, I looked at my son and saw the boy I'd raised instead of the man who'd tried to kill me. But sorry wasn't enough to undo 4 months of poisoning and attempted murder. I know you are, I called back. But sorry doesn't bring back the mother you threw away when you decided money was worth more than my life. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I did something I hadn't done since the night they were arrested. I cried. Not for Michael or Lauren. They'd made their choices and would live with the consequences. I cried for the family I'd thought I had, for the love I'd believed was real, for the 30 years I'd spent loving people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. My phone rang. Detective Mills. Mrs. Matthews, I wanted to call personally to tell you that justice was served today. Was it? I asked. My son will spend his life in prison. His wife will too. I'm alive, but I'm also alone. I'm not sure anyone really won. Mrs. Matthews, you survived. You fought back. You proved that wisdom and preparation can beat youth and greed. That's victory by any definition. After hanging up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I would return home to rebuild a life that no longer included the people I'd loved most. I had $3 billion, a mind still sharp enough to run circles around people half my age, and the rest of my life to figure out what happiness looks like when it's not tied to family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael and Lauren had tried to steal my fortune by taking my life. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift imaginable. They'd shown me exactly who they were before it was too late to protect myself. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new house in Santa Barbara, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and red. The house was smaller than my old one, but infinitely more peaceful. No family members plotting my death, no hidden cameras watching my every move, no medications being slipped into my food. Just me, my billions, and a future I got to write myself. My neighbor, Eleanor, brought me a glass of wine and settled into the chair beside me. She was 75, widowed, and had become the closest thing to family I had left. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she did most evenings. I considered the question seriously. About surviving? Not for a second. About the family I lost? Every day. But then I remembered that the family I thought I lost never actually existed. And the money? The money was never the point. Michael could have had every penny if he'd simply waited for me to die naturally and treated me with basic human decency in the meantime. Instead, he chose greed over love and lost everything. Do you think he understands that now? I think he understands that actions have consequences. Whether he understands the difference between love and manipulation, I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I raised my glass in a private toast to the woman I'd been forced to become. Survivor, fighter, and proof that sometimes the best revenge against people who want you dead is simply refusing to die. Michael and Lauren had wanted to inherit my fortune by eliminating me from the equation. Instead, they'd eliminated themselves and left me with something far more valuable than money. The knowledge that I was strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to outmaneuver anyone who mistook my love for weakness. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.